Well, good morning. This is Pastor Keith, and I want to welcome all my Justin family and friends to another devotion this morning. I'm going to keep it really brief for you. I want to remind you of the story of Job in the Bible and how he suffered and struggled and had friends accuse him of being judged by God when that wasn't the case. God tells us about Job's character in the first chapter, in the first verse. God says, there was a man named Job who lived in the land of Uz. That man was a perfect man. He was upright. He feared God, and he eschewed evil, the King James Version says, which means he ran from it, wanted nothing to do with sin. That was the character of Job, and we know that because God himself tells us that. He states it again in the second chapter of Job when he talks to Satan. He says, have you considered my servant Job? There's none like him in all the earth. He fears God, and he loves God, and he eschews evil. He runs from sin. And so Job was a great man, and yet he suffered horribly. He had some good friends that meant really well, and they came to comfort him. They sat with him for 7 days and cried with him. They were sincere men, but they really didn't understand how God works in the midst of trouble. They thought that if you were good, you'd experience good things, and if you were bad, you'd experience bad things, and that added up to, if Job was experiencing bad things, that must mean that he's done something really bad and God is judging him. And that's not true. Jesus was very honest about it when he was here. Remember, he spoke to the disciples on the night before he was arrested and crucified. He said to them, the ones he was sending into the world to preach the gospel, he said to them, in this world you will have trouble, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. When he said I've overcome the world, he meant I am overcoming the world. And we can be of good cheer. We can have hope because though we experience trouble now, Christ is overcoming the world, and it won't always be this way. But we're living in a time of trouble. And the closer we get to the coming of Jesus, the more trouble there's going to be. Jesus prophesied that so clearly, as did the Apostle Paul, as did the Apostle Peter, as did the brother of Jesus, Jude. And so in the book of Revelation, as we get closer to the coming of the Lord, there's going to be more and more trouble. But God will always give us the grace and the strength and the wisdom to be able to thrive and survive. And so I want to encourage this morning to be faithful no matter what's happening. You know, Job lost all of his children in a horrible event, and 10 children died, and yet he was faithful. He was rich, but he lost all of his money, but Job was faithful. He was accused by his friends of sinfulness when he actually was the most righteous man in the world, and yet he was faithful to God. He became sick himself. We see him sitting in the ash heap, scraping the corruption from his body, and yet he was faithful. No matter what happened, Job was faithful. Job was faithful when God blessed him, and he was rich and had a healthy and vigorous family. Job was faithful when he was healthy and well, but when his finances were lost, he was faithful. When his physical condition became unhealthy and sick, he was faithful. When he lost his family, and I don't even know how people do that, but Job did it. He was faithful even then. His wife said to him, why don't you curse God and die? And there was no way Job was going to do that. He was faithful. You know, Satan said to God one time about Job, Satan said to God, you know what? The only reason Job's good to you is because you've been so good to him. If you let him hurt a little bit, he'll turn around and he'll curse you to your face like everybody else. That's what Satan said about Job. But you know what? In that whole story, Job proved to be just as faithful to God as God said he would be. And I think that's very interesting. God in the story of Job was actually showing him off as a great example of a godly man. And one of the greatest traits he had was faithfulness when times were hard. I want to encourage you to be faithful. You know, in the 13th chapter of Job, his friends are accusing him, and it becomes a little too much for Job. So he speaks up to them and he says, why don't you all be quiet and leave me alone and let come on me what will? For even if he slays me, I will trust in him. Wow, what a great faith. What a durable faith. Now you and I are in the coronavirus situation. We're quarantined. We're isolated. It may mean that some of us are beginning to suffer a little bit financially, and these are real struggles. They're real, and we don't want to minimize them at all. And I sympathize and empathize with you and have compassion. But I want to challenge you. Be faithful like Job was. Be faithful like Jesus was. Be faithful like the Apostle Paul was. Be faithful to the Lord. And let's show the devil that not everybody who faces trouble curses God to his face. Let's show the devil that some people who love God and follow him stay faithful no matter what. God bless you. I hope you have a wonderful day.